Hello, welcome to Tube Tub Time, or Tub Tube Time, Tub Tube Time Talk, Tube Tub Time Talk Hour, Christmas special. And so I thought in this special I would do a complete meditation retreat, or rather, meditation attack, right? And so we're gonna go through, and you're gonna get the thing that people go to meditation retreats for, or spiritual retreats, or any sort of like self-work or self-improvement activity. So this is going to be done entirely online in the length of this video. You might have to watch it a couple of times. I'm going to go slow. It's going to be guided, like we're going to do it right here, right now in this video. But for each section of it, you can go through, and once you know what you're doing, practice any particular thing that we go over in this video and get a little bit better at it, and it'll transform or sort of expand your experience in these matters. So I gave away the most important implement in this training last night for somebody who was in need, right? Like I could do without it, and they really needed it, and it was my pulse oximeter. So because I gave it away, we're just gonna have to do without it and sort of imagine what it's doing, and then we are going to need to do what the device formerly was doing on our own, sort of with our own sensitivity. So with the pulse oximeter, it lets you measure your blood oxygen level. And so your blood oxygen level is essentially a big chemical battery at the core of your being. It's this fluid, it's this life from which all the energy that you have for awareness and perception and movement and everything that's going on in your body is coming out of the blood. Specifically, it's coming out of the blood oxygen, right? And so when you monitor that, you can see how full this chemical battery is, and you can conceptualize it, you can see it. It is literally this. It's a sea or an ocean of life, and you can be in it or out of it. You can't really be out of it. You're floating at the surface, right? And so that the blood oxygen is the amount of oxygen in your blood. So if you view all of that as an ocean, if you desaturate, like as you use up the oxygen in your blood, you're going down into that oxygen. And so you'll go to 90%, 80%, 70%. And as the blood desaturates, you can view that as the chemical battery draining itself of its substance. The life or the breath itself is the ocean here. It's not the blood, but it's in the blood. And it's the totality of that electric sea contained in the blood. So as you desaturate it, it's going to go down. And so that's the same as going into the blood. And so what you want is that you want to be in the space from which your life is emerging, right? So you want to be in your blood. People associate that with being in your heart. Falling into this area is what everybody finds to be good. Like whatever technique or whatever retreat that you're doing, it's somehow attempting to get you to notice or to fall into your blood. And so what we're doing here with this retreat is that I'm trying to conceptualize this so accurately and so skillfully that you can simply choose to be in the blood. You can choose to go into that area, right? So a lot of people figure out things that force them into that area. If somebody puts a gun to your head, you go into that. You go into yourself. You go into this area. You go into life because it's the place from which you have any choice over anything, any control over anything. So extreme situations do it. Performance does it. Get on stage, you'll get this rush. Attention does it. There's a lot of different things that push people into themselves. But what we're trying to do here is to explain it in such mundane terms that it just becomes something. It just becomes a choice. And so this is a hard step for a lot of people because there's a lot of religion, there's a lot of pomp, there's a lot of circumstance, there's a lot of belief, there's a lot of worship of the things and of the technologies that cause people to go into their blood, be it a heart-brain synchronizer device, or zazen, or prayer, or whatever it is that people do. Different belief systems, different, you read. Different books can hit you in such a way that it shifts you into the life of yourself. So what I could show you if I had the pulse oximeter on is that it's hard, but not really, is that if you desaturate, so if you withhold your breath a little bit so that it comes down, so that the oxygen drops down a little bit, that's the same as it's kind of the same as saying, oh, you're going to go into the blood. Right, like if you desaturate and you do some breath control, the blood starts to desire life so strongly that it has a tendency to pull on or pull you into itself a little bit more. So as we do these explorations, it's always framed in terms of a self-discovery, right? So what is it that you're discovering here is that when you have a little bit of breath control and you intentionally desaturate, the blood has this desire, has this setup, has this arrangement such that when it doesn't have oxygen, when it doesn't have energy, it pulls the oxygen into itself. So if you get it into that state where the blood is devoid of oxygen a little bit, you can go to different, like obviously the blood's going to have a much stronger draw for oxygen if you're at 30% desaturation than it would if you're at 93% saturation. But either way, if you desaturate a little bit, it causes the blood to become more magnetic towards oxygen, towards breath. So the body starts to draw you towards it. Right, and that's the sharpening of focus, the attention of when something is like let's say that you're doing sprints, right? You're using up all the oxygen in the body. Like that's a very simple way. That's why people get so many benefits from exercise. It's a very simple, effective way to cause this shift. You start running so much that it uses up, that you burn all the oxygen, that makes your blood more magnetic towards the self, and so your body actually starts to grab you because you are the life force, you're the thing choosing. Like what are you? You're at the very bottom, you are the emergence of, inside of these chemical reactions, this life, this electricity, that is you. The choices to lift or lower the body part or move around, that's What's doing that? The oxygen is doing it. The energy in the oxygen, the air, the energy of the breath. The breath is what's doing the activity. So with the breath restriction, you can make it so that you feel what it's like to have your body grab yourself. And that's also simultaneously what it feels like for the self to grab the body, for the breath and the soul to grab the body. So by hold your breath for a minute, or hold your whatever, do whatever prep work you have to do. At some point you can just choose to do this, but if you can't choose to do this, if you don't know how to grab yourself, a good way to kind of quote unquote force it or arrange it so that you can kind of clumsily do it is to do a brief hyperventilation thing to purge all of the CO2 from your body. This will prevent panic for a little bit so you can focus. As you breathe in and out, what you're trying to do is maintain as much air pressure. So as you breathe in, there's negative air pressure, or positive, whichever you want to do it. There's negative air pressure against the capillaries or against the lungs. And then when you breathe out, there's positive pressure against the lungs. So as you hyperventilate, what you're just trying to do is to keep pressure on the lungs without any interruption. So you'll have to switch from positive to negative, and you want to try and keep it as strong as possible. And then once it starts to fall off, then just switch to the other polarity and breathe in. So, and then don't do this thing to where if you breathe in all the way, you'll notice that your power, in terms of the ability to generate pressure at the lungs, starts to drop off. So just avoid that area where you have diminished power and switch back and forth between the polarity of in and out. And you can play with see what type of restriction of the mouth and the nose, however that is that generates the most pressure at the lungs. Like if I just am like this, I'm not generating much pressure at the lungs unless I go like, so that's pretty big pressure at the lungs. And then see what other types of movement patterns. It's going to be very slight, that you can kind of just generate the most amount of pressure at the lungs. That pressure is what's going to cause the gas exchange or the energy exchange to be the highest. So you do that for about 10 to 20 breaths or whatever. Don't even count if you're doing it right and maintaining pressure with no gaps. You'll feel when you get to this point, and it'll be kind of you'll be something kind of like shifts where you go. Where you purge so much CO2 that the blood's actually wanting CO2, and that causes a little feeling of relaxation because the blood is actually helping all the cells expel the CO2. So you get to that place from the hyperventilation. That makes it easier to plunge into the blood without panic. So it kind of alters the CO2 temperature, so it's unnaturally warm, unnaturally comfortable. So it's like an artificial pool. Your everyday activity, if you're not doing that, the blood is actually a little bit shocking to enter, and that shock is from the CO2 level. That's a temperature. So you can tolerate, it's like how ice baths, you can do it, you just really don't want to. The CO2 thing is kind of an ick feeling that doesn't stop anything or interfere with anything if you just have the mental ability to face it. And that's the exact same way with cold. So cold, if you do cold ice baths, it kind of lets you play with the same mindset that you need to start playing with in terms of the CO2 levels in the body. It's almost not important, but it's the same way that the temperature of the water is not really important for swim practice. The levels of CO2 in the blood are also not really important for breath work, even though it determines a large part of the psychological comfort of at least starting the breath work of you don't want to get in the water. And then if you're doing intense breath work, with generating super high levels of CO2, there's a physical limit, the same way that there's a physical limit to how much cold you can survive. there's like a physical limit to how much CO2 saturation your body can survive long term over a period of minutes to hours. And it's identical to cold adaptation. So CO2 exposure is pretty much almost, in terms of your skill of what you're having to do to master it, CO2 tolerance is the same as cold tolerance. So they're useful to cross-train with each other. And so this technique is only useful when you don't have CO2 tolerance or you just can't do it. Like right now, like it seems stupid, I'll just get in. Right, I don't mind. So, and this stuff's, it's extremely difficult to talk about this stuff and be doing it at the same time. For the same reason, it's difficult to teach swimming and swim at the same time. They, like, the inner dialogue, this mind, like, crazy interferes with the execution of any of these breath techniques. So I'm kind of going to be trying to do both at once, but at the same time realize it's a totally different game. I can demo like swimming and I kind of have my head up, but that's totally different than like shutting this whole thing down and using the full technique of my mind. So you're going to miss that in terms of a video, and then the practice of this is not interesting to watch, so we'll just skip it. And then when you drop to like 93, you can see it with the pulse oximeter if you're wearing one on your thumb or your health ring or whatever. When it drops to like 93 or so, there's this focused calm that comes up, and you can just keep it at 93, and that's the blood is magnetically attracted to the self, so they're sticking together and they're adhering together. So if you keep it desaturated sub 93, as you breathe in and out, the breath, the being itself, will be magnetically attracted to the air, to the energy. So the breathing in the in and the out is something that your breath is doing. It's not your breathing anymore. Your breathing is happening constantly. Your blood is constantly sucking in or pulling on the oxygen. So if you don't let that become saturated, the pull is constant, so it's like picking up an object and not letting it go. So right at 93%, you can see the blood. You can feel this at any point. Like this, the 93% is just what I'm saying. Like the force gets pretty strong to where I feel like you could notice it without being like hypersensitive. If you're focused, you'll notice that the blood oxygen attractedness is happening all the time. Like all the time, and you can kind of feel that the same way that you would the surface flitterings of water. But like if you desaturate a little bit, it kind of makes a wave in it that's noticeable. And a pull is if like an electromagnet, which is what it is, suddenly gets strong enough to kind of like feel. And if you desaturate down to 85 or 75 or lower, you can really start to feel the body like strongly pull on the oxygen. And if people confuse this draw for the reaction to the CO2, and they're unrelated. So if you can learn how to ignore the CO2 other than to stay within a range that keeps you alive, you can separate out the effect of the oxygen and that polarity of the blood, because the blood is like a magnet and the oxygen is playing a big role in the polarities or the location of that magnet. So you separate the CO2 panic or the ick feeling, and once you get to like 90% lower, the draw between the blood and the life, the connection between the soul and body gets pretty strong. And it's a little bit like if you pick up a big heavy weight, it's that amount of effort, that amount of exertion is somewhat all-encompassing, and how much of it attracts your attention. You can't really be doing much else. Like when you lift up 500 pounds or 1,000 pounds in a deadlift, during that exertion, you can't do anything else. And so when you desaturate the blood a lot, so that the body is grabbing the air, but also the air, the soul is grabbing the body. So when you grab your body that much, it's an extreme effort. And like when you're doing powerlifting, all the muscles are using so much air all at the same time that the blood grabs the soul. And so it's just one of those events where you can get the soul to grab the body by putting it into a situation where it thinks it's important, or putting it into a situation to where they're scared or they're terrified together. The soul and the body, you get this connection to your life, the air, to choice, right? So instead of having to like play or train, if you can find that the breath control is just facilitating your choice to grab and to be with your body, then you can just grab it, and then by grabbing it, your breath control will look like the technique sort of. You'll find that, to stay connected to my body in this position, or to grab it even harder, you'll notice that those breath techniques have to come out. And so when you fall into the life or into the blood, I would suggest that you're actually, in some sense, dipping your toes or your being or your soul into this higher, like fifth dimensional space. The blood surface that I'm talking about being the surface of it is like the boundary, like the oxygen, the blood, the hemoglobin, the magnetism, the electricity of the air and all that is one side of a surface, to where if you go into the other side with these techniques of grabbing the soul, it's exactly like getting into water, but another higher dimensional. And so you're floating on the surface of it de facto, the same way that you would be water, but if when you desaturate or you just play with this a little bit, you only have to submerge a little bit into water to get the stuff to support you entirely. You have to put about 90% of your body area in the water, and if you do, it's suddenly there's enough to like float you. But if you have any amount of yourself out, the water's not supporting you, and so it doesn't seem to be helping with control or doing anything but kind of wishy-washing you around. But if you get into it just a little bit, all of a sudden, like you can float in 1 foot of water if you're laying down. But if you can get into like 3 feet of water, all of a sudden you can actually start swimming. And it's the same thing with this breathwork stuff. At first, it's like being, when you get into it, at first it's like being on the shore and you just get pummeled by waves. And it's like worse off. You don't have the control of the land where we're out of your life altogether, like on the land, and you don't have any of that control, that safety, and it's just getting pummeled by this stuff over and over again. But if you go deeper and deeper, eventually it gets out like further than where the waves are breaking, and you feel the flotation or the support of the consciousness. So you have to get into a certain depth. But it only takes you might be in this super deep, like 5 mile deep ocean, but all of the swimming is always going to happen here along the surface. So while you can go down to like what we would say is a 30% desaturation, that big of a draw is going that deep into that realm, right? The deeper the breath work, the deeper you're going into this fifth dimensional realm, and it gets harder and crazier and it's bigger, and it doesn't it's an interesting thing to understand and know that you can do it and there's applications to it. But for the most part, if you're just focusing on swimming and floating, you're not going to break away from the surface. You're still going to be, swimming takes place mostly at the surface, or detached from the surface just a little bit so that you're totally free of it, and then can do more embodied, fuller techniques. It's the exact same way with breath work. There's no real swimming techniques that deal with being 10 meters underwater. There's no waves that you catch at that area. All the waves that you can catch as a human are like right here at the top. You can't catch waves super deep down. So the breath work is this arena, this fifth dimensional arena that is identical to the arena that you see in water. Like where the sports take place, where the fishing activities take place, how the boats and stuff work on it, the skills involved, like swimming, balance, all of that stuff is like it's identical to the terrain in the arena in the realm of breath work. So just grab your soul, or grab your body, doing that by desaturating, getting the pulse oximeter and see like, okay, yeah, and then associate, feel like, this level of grab is like, that's that percentage, and if I drop it down a little bit, yeah, I know, and you'll see that if you get distracted, that's because it's on the surface at 97 plus. If you're at all under or in the breath, there's the distractions, the talk, the dialogue, the chatter is all on the surface. So that goes away once there's any type of submersion technique is learned. Then the distractions, the noise, the dialogue, the chatter just goes away. And so you'll see that like it's just like diving in the water. You'll go down and you'll have like these periods of like total stillness, the same way that 50 meters down the water is still. It is silence itself, versus at the surface it's the waves and the ocean and the turbulence. The same thing underneath the waves and the ocean and the turbulence is silence itself. So like water is a mirror within, like the same way that a mirror is a two-dimensional surface that reflects a three-dimensional reality, and you can see in that mirror, you can see a picture of the world that you live in, but it's a two-dimensional picture. Water is the exact same thing, but for a higher dimensional realities of the soul. Water is a reflection of it. It's a three-dimensional reflection of 4 or 5-dimensional realm. Water is that flatness, realms, realities, the breath, the place where the soul exists, can be seen in 3 dimensions in water, the exact same way that the 3-dimensional world of reality can be seen in the 2-dimensional glass. So if you don't understand anything that I'm talking about, just cross-reference it with your understanding of water, which you already have a pretty good understanding just from watching surfing and swimming and things like that, and drinking it, and bathing in it, and so forth. So, and really that's it. Like here you've gotten, at that point, like if you kind of just contemplate and mull over and practice and chew on the stuff that we kind of talked about in this video, very quickly you will develop the ability to have the choice to enter into a state of consciousness that some people needed, like the hoopla of fame or money or disaster or trauma or brilliance or insight or wisdom or love, like something that people need a big hoopla doopla for. You can turn it into a choice, and that's I guess that's why I would call it a spiritual attack, because if you choose to do this, that's just punching whatever that is preventing you from doing it in the face. If you figure out a way to force it to happen without choice, you kind of lead. You're not attacking the problem. But the instant you're like, I'm just going to do this, that's kind of a spiritual attack. It's an assault. And so there's like, you could practice like getting the desaturation down to like 85 and keeping it down there, and then slowly get up, because it's hard the same way that, like, how do I move with like 100 pounds in each hand? It's hard. But if you can realize, like, what's the control mechanism by which I can just consciously grab my body, that my soul can unite and grab my body, you feel it and pick it up, and the more of your body you pick up, the more that it's a maximum exertion. But pick it up strongly and figure out how to move around. And that's what you would call skateboarding or parkour or dance or anything else. Is the people have learned how to grab their body and not let it go, because then you just go, and then you go through the movement. And if you don't let go of your body at this level, if you keep your body, if you keep your blood connected to your soul, as you choose to do something, people will just naturally see that as beautiful. You will only be able to do beautiful movements. And so even at this, you'll find, like, how strongly should I be grabbing my body to have the greatest sensitivity and the greatest connection between my soul and my body, right? Like, if I'm grabbing it so strongly that I can't do anything else, I can't think, I can't perceive anything other than this rigid connection, that's not good. And if the connection's so light in area that there's not really any control, it's somewhere in the middle ground. And in general, you want it to be very, very, very strong. That's good. But also you want it to be, like, very relaxed so that you can still feel as it's happening. And so teaching external form is useful, but, like, why am I doing any particular movements? I want to be doing whatever it is that keeps me most connected to my soul at that point in time. And like I don't want to rely on like, oh, I think this movement, I have belief or faith that this movement pattern is going to connect me to my soul. It's like you want to actually grab your soul and then maintain that grip, and whatever has to happen has to happen. And so you might have to stop doing, if certain things are causing you certain types of anxiety or certain ways of being. A lot of this stuff has to do with like financial, like basically relational, right? Financial is just relational. How am I relating to the world with my power, with my choice? I have this much choice, or in my social relationships, like how am I wielding that choice? If it's not being done correctly, it's so distracting that the choice to adhere to the soul can't be made. It keeps you attached to the surface. And so you can't get to where the blood is desiring, where the blood is desiring the oxygen strong enough that you have a good solid connection to the soul. It's like there's too much satiation, right? If there's too much breathing, if there's too much breath, if there's too much of whatever, then the blood is going to be too saturated for there to be an actual connection. So strangely, like when you're most full on these various planes of existence, that's when the weakest attachment between the body and soul is there. And that's why like demonic forces that want to like separate you, like things want to separate you from your soul and body the exact same way that animals, when they're eating each other, like animals of prey, eat by separating the soul from the body. And so humans are preyed on by like fifth dimensional beings that separate the soul from the body, and they do that through satiation. The demonic temptation is just to satiate, to get it to where you actually get what you want. The exact same way of like if you're totally oxygenated, there's zero desire to connect to your higher self, which is all around you. You're totally satiated with what's in you. There's no need to connect to what's outside, and so there's actually physically no connection to the outside. So then at that point you can be very easily separated or ripped away from your body and consumed. And so those predators, to where you see the soul separated from the body and you go, oh, the body's fine, nobody ate the body, those are the most dangerous predators because they're eating the soul. Like if you get eaten by a lion or something down here, it's like you get eaten, you go, oh, okay, they're eating the body, the soul's probably fine, the soul's fine. Like if the body gets screwed up, the soul's fine, right? But if you see somebody get separated and the body stays fine, that means the soul is definitely being kind of screwed up. And so yeah, it's deprivation, it's lack. And all of that deprivation, that lack, causes something akin to a CO2 buildup that is basically all psychological suffering. And the lack and the deprivation is actually, if you get rid of the psychological suffering, there's a celebration, there's a reward, there's a relaxation, there's a comfort, there's a safetiness that you get when you feel how strongly your soul is magnetically attached to reality, to the world. So in these moments of deprivation and lack and like need, where people really need something, that's when their soul is actually just magnetically coupled to God or to their body. It's the breath mirrors this fifth dimensional reality, the same way the water mirrors it. So there's when people talk about metaphors, like these biological metaphors of the body, is the reflection and the lower teaching of the temple or the kingdom. So the same way that water reflects the realm, the patterns of the breath reflect the mind. And so you'll see that in these patterns of how you respond to oxygen need and CO2 buildup. Everything in life, everything in the mind mirrors that same basic pattern of the suffering being caused by the CO2 buildup. If you can get rid of that and just play with the need or the want or the desire itself, there's nothing but good feelings in terms of desire. You're either deep or you're shallow, but you're in it. You're in your desire. You're in your heart. You're in the oxygen, and then you're not paying attention to the CO2. The CO2 is like it's a sensor that you need to kind of like not die in a way, but it's also it's like people have been conditioned to suffer based on the state of their CO2, which is that gnawing, like, oh my god, I need to breathe, I'm convulsing, it's terrible. It's not from running out of oxygen, that's just from I don't want to deal with this CO2 feeling. So that's the same thing for like poverty, hunger, all that. There's a certain thing in it that's like a discomfort that has like no bearing on anything, almost. It's just a signal. And that's where people suffer. And that's, you have CO2 sensors in your neck, and that's where the feeling to breathe goes. If you somehow screw up the CO2 sensors or get them discombobulated, like with hyperventilating, you have no qualms with running out of oxygen. There's zero suffering associated with like not getting what you actually need. All the suffering is from dealing with your own waste products, so to speak, of your own having to look at your own results, I guess, the results of your effort. The result of how you're using the air that you get is uncomfortable. And so yeah, that's a free online breath meditation retreat course seminar that you just experienced. I hope it was useful. If you would like to learn more, just send me an email or like, comment, subscribe.